Well, good morning to you all. It's a pleasure to be here. I walked outside this morning. It was not humid like I'm accustomed to down in the Tampa area, and I thought, truly this is a blessed land. Well, thank you for inviting me here for many reasons, but I just appreciate the weather in Kentucky. It's not extreme. From my perspective, it's very balanced. And I've always enjoyed the times I've been in Kentucky, the years I lived in the area or somewhere else in the state. And so it's good to be in Kentucky again. And a pleasure to be with you all. I've known of the University Heights congregation, known of it for almost as far back as I can remember. I don't recall ever worshiping here, except maybe once when I was in college, but it's been a few years and a lot of things run together. So I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, thank you for the invitation to be here. And I'll get right to it because we only have so much time, right? Archaeology. When we think of archaeology in the Bible, what use do we have for it? And maybe one way we tend to look at it is, let me adjust something up here so I can see a little better. I should have done this earlier, and I did not. Okay, well, I'll just put my glasses on. That's even better. You get to a certain age, right? Okay. Now, a lot of Christians, a lot of believers in general, when we look at the benefit of archaeology in the Bible, why do we study it? What's good that comes from it? And if I already believe, why do I need any archaeology? My faith is not from sight. Well, that's correct. But we often use it maybe as a tool to try to persuade other people. See, this is why you should believe as I do. This is why you should believe the Bible. We found this and that proves that, so you need to believe this too. Boom, sort of an approach like that. I'm going to suggest that is not really the way archaeology should work. Because, for example, let's say we find an ancient sling stone. Sling stones are famous in the Bible. David killed Goliath with one, didn't he? And that photo up there is an actual sling stone. They're actually pretty common. When you go over there. That's my hand holding it just after it came out of the ground. That's from around the time of David. It's about 3,000 years old. And we recognize them because they're very spherical, almost like a stone tennis ball. They're very rounded. They're worked with tools so that they'll be balanced, and fly straight. I mean, think of it from a modern caliber standpoint. What caliber is that stone? Imagine it hitting you at 70 miles an hour. It's brutal. Slingers were essentially ancient snipers. And if you were good from a distance, then you could, do what snipers do in battle. Disrupt the enemy, take a lot of them out before they can even get to you, support your main infantry formations, that sort of thing. But let's say we find this sling stone. Sling stone, there we go. But does this stone prove that David killed Goliath, like the Bible says? No, it doesn't. All we see is that someone had this round sling stone at some point. It doesn't prove how it was used or how anyone else used anything. See, the David and Goliath story is still faith. This doesn't prove the story. Archaeology has limitations on what it can do, but we can confirm that people used those kinds of weapons, and it helps us understand maybe how they were used. It wasn't just a fluke. Now, David didn't get that stone. It says he got his stones from the riverbed. So he was looking for something as close to that as he could find. If it wasn't, he didn't sit there and say, hold on, Goliath, let me take this rock and get my tools and start working it. Hang on, one more minute. No, he didn't do that, of course. But we get an idea of what was in his mind's eye. What was he looking for? It was something like that, or as close to that as he could get. So archaeology doesn't prove Bible stories. But it does offer a lot of benefits. I'm going to talk about those in our time together this morning. So that's my first year on a dig. That's my father on the top. That's me using the force to levitate a bucket to him. See, archaeology, it's not just Indiana Jones. There are powers and mystery associated with it. And just, getting the camera to get you at just the right moment, really. So no powers, unfortunately. But that, interestingly, my first dig, I was there several years. This valley in the background, those farm fields, that's the valley where David killed Goliath. The Bible tells us exactly the area where it happened. And this is on one of the hills. There's a hill on the other side. And from the biblical description, this hill was the side Saul and his army were on. and the Philistines were on the hill on the other side. So we get some geography. But what are some benefits of archaeology? Let's just start with this one. One time years ago, someone was walking down, not in that area, but somewhere else, and saw a stone and cleared it and saw writing on it. And I doubt any of us can read that, but there are some people who can. And they brought them in and they translated it, and it translates to the boundary of Gezer. We often pronounce, it's a biblical city. We often pronounce it Gezer, but Gezer is also a rather impolite term for an older person, isn't it? So I prefer the Hebrew pronunciation, Gezer. It sounds a little less prejudicial. It's also the word for carrot. The city of Carrot. Go figure, we're not told why. But the boundary of this biblical city. And then they found some other stones in other areas with that same inscription. So one's over here, one's over there, one's back over here. What if people just figured out, where was the city of Gezer? Oh, we found it. And so archaeology in that case gave us the location of a city mentioned in the Old Testament, but people had forgotten where it was. It had been abandoned and there's nothing left, just a kind of a blank hill. And there are a lot of these empty blank hills in Israel, and they're usually cities in the past, but which city? And so we don't always know, and people often have forgotten. And so archaeology helped us identify that location. Now we know where it is, and we've dug, and it's actually pretty impressive. Here's an inscription we found over in the Philistine areas, and it translates the temple that he built. Achish, son of Padi, king of Ekron. Ekron was a Philistine city. It's mentioned in the Bible. But we found this in a big ruined city. What did we just learn? It's like a dedication inscription, like a cornerstone. We learned what these ruins used to be. They used to be a Philistine city called Ekron, mentioned in the Bible. And so that was handy. So one benefit archaeology brings us, it helps us identify places in the Bible that have been forgotten. So if you look in the back of your Bibles, one of those maps, the little dots, some of them have never been forgotten. Jerusalem, it's been continuously inhabited. No one's ever forgotten where it is. Nazareth, same thing. No one's ever abandoned it. It's always been remembered. People have always lived there since the time of Jesus. But a lot of cities, that's not the case. And archaeology helps us rediscover what this big ruined city used to be. And that's very handy. So a lot of the dots on the maps come from archaeology. Here's another benefit of it. We may have heard of the Hittites in the Old Testament. And who's the most famous Hittite of them all? Can someone name the most famous Hittite in the Bible? Uriah, from the time of David, Bathsheba's first husband. And the Hittites are mentioned several other times in the Old Testament, but the entire people had disappeared from history. And some of you may have heard of this example, but people used to read the Old Testament and the Hittites, and we look at what we found in our old historical records and don't find any mention of them. There doesn't seem to have ever been a Hittite people. So what was the reaction of some people? The Bible made it up. Just a bunch of fiction. Until in the 1800s, it's been a while. In the 1800s, we found the capital city of the Hittites, Hattusa. And this is one of the main gates. And you can see there are even lions represented on both sides, right there and right there. Kind of ruined, but the city itself is quite large, covers a lot of area. There's another angle of the gate. And there's just one section of the old city wall going down. So that's just one small section. But we can, just from that one photo, get a sense this is a pretty big place. And we discovered where they lived. It was not in Canaan. It was up in Turkey. Modern Turkey, in the central area of Turkey, is where the Hittites were originally from. We've also learned they were destroyed and had to flee their homeland. And they went to other areas. And that's how Uriah's ancestors ended up down in Canaan. They were still ethnically Hittite, but their homeland had been destroyed. They were scattered. But now we know quite a bit about them. We can even read their language. They were a big power in their day. But archaeology helps us resurrect peoples that have been forgotten by other sources in history. Another benefit of archaeology. Let's do it this way. Does anyone recall or know how long a cubit was? Okay, yeah, the elbow to the finger, and in our measurements, roughly how long, what do we usually hear? What have you heard? About 18 inches, okay? Here's another question. How much was a denarius? Jesus talked about them. They appear several times. What's an idea of what that's worth? Is it like, a buck, $100, $10,000? What was a denarius worth, roughly? What's our sense of that value? A day's salary, a day's wage for a typical worker? Yes, good. And how long ago, roughly, did David live? How many years ago? Just rounding it off. What'd you say? 1,000 BC? That's right. So how about 3,000 years ago, approximately? Okay, good. And has anyone heard about this one? Jesus talked about the needle, the eye of the needle, how it's easier for a person who trusts in their riches. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone trusting in their riches to get to heaven. What is that needle's eye? I heard a long time ago, and multiple times, that the needle's eye was a nickname for a small gate beside the regular city gate. And if you close the main gate, it's big enough for a person, but for a camel, you have to get the animal on its knees and kind of work through. Have you heard that before? Okay. Yeah, so have I. The needle's eye was a nickname for a small gate beside the main gate. Guess what I learned a few years ago? No such thing. That story is actually a myth, what we call an urban legend. That it's literally the eye of a needle. There are little gates like that beside big gates, and you can close the main one but still have individuals walk in and out. That's why it's there. But the term needle's eye is a nickname. We've never ever found that. And the best we can figure is someone maybe guessed or speculated or misspoke 100, 120, 140 years ago, and it just keeps being repeated in sermons and Bible dictionaries and things like that. But the archaeology actually shows there's no such thing as the needle's eye being a name for a gate. Now, how do we know any of this, though? A denarius, how long is a cubit? How do we know any of those things? The Bible mentions all of them, but doesn't define any of them for us. How do we know? Archaeology, extra biblical sources. Archaeology is what's taught us all of these things. And we've actually learned more about the cubit. I was attending a conference not long ago, and a guy demonstrated the cubit was actually closer to 21 inches, not 18. 18 was the cubit in a different part of the world. And that got put into dictionaries and sermons. It's actually closer to 21 inches, like 20 and a half, 20 and 3/4 inches. A little bit longer. How do we know that? Because all over Canaan, in cities and sites in the Old Testament and the New Testament period, we see that the standard measurements like gate sizes, stone width, stone lengths, they're all based on a cubit that's almost 21 inches long, not 18. If you use a cubit almost 21 inches, the math is perfect. You try to use an 18-inch cubit and you get weird fractions all the time. They were using a longer cubit than we usually associate. It was closer to 21. But how do we know that? It doesn't change anything in the Bible. It's just we see the word cubit and how long was it. Archaeology gave us that. The denarius archaeology. David, I'll show you later today how we came up with 3,000 years ago. And the needle's eye, actually that's very helpful because when Jesus is saying it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone trusting in their riches to go to heaven. What was his point there? If I trust in riches instead of the Lord's things, how hard is it to get to heaven? Was Jesus' point, well, as long as you just kind of work it a little more, you can trust in your riches and you'll still be good. Just squeeze it through. Was that his point? It actually was not his point. His point was, you can't. You cannot serve God and mammon. It's one or the other. The needle's eye, he was talking about a literal needle, the eye of a literal needle. That actually is consistent with his point. If we make it a gate where it's difficult, that waters down the point he was actually making. He was saying, you cannot trust in riches. We cannot put our trust in earthly things and still enter the kingdom of heaven. We have to put our trust in the things of God, the things of the kingdom. So that in that case, the archaeology actually restores Jesus' original meaning from an error or a mistake or misunderstanding. And that is helpful because don't we want to understand Jesus' teachings as he originally meant them? Of course we do. And archaeology can be a good tool for that. So one benefit of archaeology, it helps us understand what we read in the Bible and understand it originally as the original Bible people understood it. Okay, here's another one. How about this? How long ago was Jesus born, roughly? How many years ago? Yeah, a little over 2,000, yes. Now, how do we know that? Because the Bible doesn't use our calendar. And it doesn't have a prophetic statement in the Gospels. Someday there will be a calendar based on Jesus' birth, and it doesn't do that. But a little over 2,000. How long ago did David reign? We already answered that one, about 3,000 years ago, right? When was the temple built? Solomon's temple. Roughly what year or years did he build the temple? Do we know? And how long ago was the Exodus from Egypt? And so there's one inscription here. We'll go into more detail. It's in Egypt, of all places. And it's from a biblical pharaoh named Shishak. He's mentioned in the time of Solomon and Solomon's son Rehoboam. The Bible says he invaded Canaan in the time of Solomon's son Rehoboam. And we found his version, Shishak's version of his invasion, on a wall. It's heavily damaged. It's been put back together. You can see some of the evidence where they had to reconstruct it. And some of it is damaged and not readable anymore, but a lot of it is. But the Bible mentions that this Pharaoh Shishak invaded Jerusalem and Judah during the 5th year of King Rehoboam. But it doesn't really give us anything more than that. In the 5th year of Rehoboam, Egypt invaded, Shishak. Well, when was that? And all these little people there are all cities that Shishak captured during his invasion. They're all named. But the benefit is that, well, I'll explain it later, is that Shishak's records give us a calendar date from Egypt's calendar, and we know Egypt's calendar. We know it. And we find out from that inscription that was about the year 925 BC. And so how do we know the date of the invasion? Because of archaeology. And we can use that wall, that inscription with that date, we can use that to date a lot of other things. I can't remember if I put that detail in the outline, if you're taking notes with the outlines. But if not, it's in the sermon today. I'll show you exactly how we get it. Because we get a lot more than just the invasion from that inscription. We can date Solomon, we can date David, we can date the temple, we can date the Exodus from that one inscription about this invasion. It's pretty cool. The invasion was the 5th year of his reign, and so we can also get, when did Rehoboam start becoming king? Well, 5 years before 925, so that's about 930. And he began the year Solomon died. So when did Solomon die? About 930 BC. And so we can start working from there and date other people, other things. It's very handy. Archaeology gives us dates. And the Bible helps us with some things. The New Testament does give us this about the birth of Jesus. In the days of Herod, king of Judah. So do we know when Herod the Great reigned? If so, that gives us a window. And the design of the slide, it's a little faded here. I guess one of those transfer from one computer to another. But it says in Luke's account, chapter 2, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus. So do we know when Caesar Augustus was sitting in Rome? If so, Caesar, when did he overlap with Herod? And it mentions a guy named Quirinius was governor of Syria. Do we know when Quirinius was governor? So we have all these fixed points. When do they all converge? And that gives us a date range. Archaeology gives us a timeline for the Bible as well. When did this happen? How long ago was this? Archaeology is what gives that to us, because the Bible doesn't include that information most of the time. Here's another benefit of archaeology. It's a story about Abraham to illustrate it. When you picture Abraham, how do you picture Abraham? Old guy with a beard sitting under a tree, a bunch of animals and tents around. Yeah. But look at this story and see if this fits the Abraham that you think of. His nephew Lot was captured by an invading force, an enemy. And so Abram, they're captured. What's Abram do? Old Abraham gets up, holds his back, we got to do something, pray to God. No. It says Abram, when he heard Lot had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them. And look at those phrases again. and went in pursuit. Look at all that. Abram gets up. He has trained men born in his house, 318. That's a lot of guys, fighting age. They've been trained in warfare and weapons. Who trained them? Did Abraham train them himself? Did he have like a deputy who trained them? It doesn't tell us, but isn't that interesting? Abraham joined the pursuit, and he goes up there with his 318 men, and it says he divided the forces by night, did a nighttime two-pronged attack, at least two. We're not told how many divisions. And he defeated them, brought everything and everybody back. That's an amazing military story. And that's not usually the way we think of Abraham. As a militaristic, has a bunch of warriors just around for any event that may be necessary. And they're not like hired mercenaries. They were born in his house. How many people did Abraham have with him? Looking at this, it hints that he actually had a pretty big clan at that point. Isn't that interesting? And he went from way down there, that box. He chased the enemies way up to the top and defeated them up above the city of Dan, as far as there. And in that area was the battle, and he brought everyone back. But there's an artifact we found from the city where Abraham grew up originally. He grew up in a place called Ur. And a long time ago, excavations there produced this wooden box. You can see the person behind it. It gives some scale of the size of it. It's a painted wooden box called the Standard of Ur. That's not as important. But you see people, the 3 rows of people on it. And if you go to London to the British Museum, it's in one of the rooms on the 2nd level. If you've been there before, maybe you saw it. If you haven't, go there and make it to the 2nd level, and you'll see it if you recognize it. It's in a glass case. But look a little more closely at it. It's painted on every side. This one side's interesting. Look at the bottom row first. What's going on in the bottom row? It's a battle scene. It looks like some kind of cart. It's almost like an ancient chariot. 2 axles, 4 wheels, a front and back wheel. There are 2 people, it appears, and each one a driver, then a guy with a weapon. I guess they're the modern version of tanks. You charge and you throw spears at people, shoot arrows at people. And look at the bottom. They're running over people. And this last one, the horses are rearing up like the action grows from left to right. It's an interesting battle scene. That's where Abraham grew up. And you move to the row above it, and who are those guys on the top? They're all dressed alike. They all have some kind of helmet and a cloak and a weapon. They're soldiers, uniformed soldiers. And that reminds us of a reality that ancient cultures, they had the draft, conscripted soldiers. We don't do that in this country anymore, but we used to. But a part of your service to your king, if you're a young man, is military service. So when Abraham is growing up in Ur, did he have to fight in the army? The answer is probably yes. Everyone had to, unless you had some reason you couldn't. That was part of your obligation to the state. And so Abraham probably got military experience growing up. Who knows, maybe he was even an officer or something more advanced. He's a capable leader when he's an old guy in Canaan. But is he drawing on his earlier military experience from Ur? It's very reasonable to think that, isn't it? The dots are connected there. Abraham wasn't always just a pacifist, sitting out in the field shepherd. As a young man, he would have done what any young man would have done. And it gives us insight into Abram, doesn't it? Do we think about him a little differently now? Maybe he's a little more normal, a little more relatable, not just some mystical faith superhero that's not like everyone else. He was, but it wasn't because of his background, because of his choice of faith. That's what made him different. But otherwise, he was a normal guy and did what everyone would have done. And so that reminds us, suggests he may have had earlier military experience. Archaeology can give us background for people in the Bible. What were their lives like? And what was going on in the world in the time of Abraham or David or Jesus or something like that. And that's useful because it makes them more me. The things they had to make decisions about and what's going on, how do I make decisions with what's going on around us? They're the same kinds of things we deal with today. They were like us. They're not some different category of human. They are you and me, and they dealt with the same things, the same kinds of things you and I deal with, and maybe seeing them as more relatable makes their influence even more powerful for you and me. That's why we're told these stories, because they're also our stories in life. Even people like Abraham. Okay, here's another benefit. How many do we have now? Is it like 6 or 7? I'm losing count. But in your Bibles, in Jeremiah 39 verse 3, there's a verse there, not a famous verse. But this is when Nebuchadnezzar conquers Jerusalem. And it says that he and some of his officials came down and sat in the middle gate of Jerusalem. And it lists some of his officials. We have Nergal-Sar-Ezer, Samgar-Nebu, Sarsekim the Rabsaris, Nergal-Sar-Ezer the Rabmag, and all those simple names that just flow off the tongue. Yeah. But they met together. That's the New American Standard Version, but change your version. Go to the New International Version, for example. And the names, there's a difference in the names. If you look, you see over here in red, Nebu-Sarsakim, but over here, the Nebu and the Sarsakim are divided between 2 different people. But in the NIV, they're the names of one person. What's going on here? Is it a corrupted text or some problem? What it is, why do we have the names differently there? And here's why. Because those are Babylonian names, not your typical Hebrew words. Ancient Hebrew was written with no spaces between the words. And that sounds very confusing to us, but if you grow up with it, it's no big deal. You just learn to read it, without any spaces. But you get to this list of names, they're Babylonian names, not Hebrew names or words, so they're not familiar. So we just, where do you divide the names? The text is all the same, but where do you put the spaces? And we haven't been able to agree. Some people think, the Nebu and the Sarsakim, split them up. But others are like, no, put them together as the same person. Which one is it? Where do we put the spaces? There was debate over that and just, agree to disagree, but we really couldn't figure it out. The translators couldn't until 2005, 20 years ago this year. And someone translated this little tablet. It actually is small enough to fit in your hand. And the tablet itself was discovered back in the 1870s. It was part of a collection of more than 100,000 tablets. How long does it take to translate 100,000 tablets? A few years. And how many people can even know how to translate them? Not very many. So they've been working on it ever since the 1870s, and they take turns. The few people in the world able to read that, they take a month off, go over and start, get in the basement in Germany where all those things are sitting and start translating tablets. And eventually, after 135 years or whatever, they finally worked their way to this one. And the guy translated it. He's like, wait a minute, I've seen this name before. It's a Bible name. And it's the same guy. It dates to the same period. It's talking about one of Nebuchadnezzar's officials. And guess what we learned? His name is Nebo-Sarsakim. One name. They're put together in the same name. So, which translation of the Bible puts the spaces in the right place? It turns out it was the New International Version. They got it right, for once. But they got it right this time. And so, it's a small thing. It doesn't change doctrine or the way we understand, but archaeology can help us better learn the languages and improve our translation. Little tweaks here and there. And that's one benefit. There's another example in 1 Kings chapter 7, I believe it is. There's a detailed description of the temple and the palace that Solomon built. But a lot of the Hebrew words there are technical terms that you just don't use regularly. Do you ever, get into like construction or plumbing or computer something, or and people start throwing around words? They're pretty specific to that area, and most people don't know those terms because we don't use them. Well, that's what happened with some of the Hebrew. And there was disagreement. How do we translate some of this Hebrew describing Solomon's temple and Solomon's palace? And archaeology, just less than 20 years ago, helped us figure out what some of those words mean. And now we know how to better translate that Hebrew. I might talk about that in a different lesson. But it can help us improve our translation, which is, of course, part of our overall goal to understand the Bible as it originally was written. Okay, does anyone recognize this scene? That's Elijah the prophet. The contest of the prophets of Baal. Yeah, a pretty famous story in the Bible. And here's the setup for it. It's the time of Ahab and Jezebel. Lovely people. And Ahab, the Bible tells us, did more wickedness than all the guys before him, and that's saying something. And he married Jezebel, who's not even an Israelite. If you look, she's actually from the Sidonians. Her dad is named Baal. She's from another country. And so she's an idol worshiper. Her dad's named for Baal. In fact, the Jezebel, the bell at the end, is a form of the word Baal, the god. So she and her father both have Baal in their names. And it just gets even worse. And with Jezebel as queen in Israel, Ahab builds an altar for Baal in the house, like the temple of Baal. There's a temple for Baal. They make an altar in the kingdom of Israel. And fertility goddess and Asherah. It provokes the Lord more than anyone before him. It's terrible. Baal is being treated as the official religion of Israel now. And that's very bad. Well, who was Baal? From archaeology, we've learned a lot about him. He was the god of the weather, rain and storm and thunder. So if you're a kid at night and it thunders outside and you're scared, if you're a parent, if you're an ancient Canaanite or something, it's okay, honey, that's just Baal, clearing his throat or something, and maybe the kid feels better because Baal's good and he sends us the rain. And so Baal was the god of the weather. And we found from archaeology these tablets, which are now sitting in Paris in the Louvre Museum, where the Mona Lisa is. They also have these tablets, and they tell us about Baal stories. And we realized that Baal had a whole story every year. He would die every year. Did you realize that? Because over in that part of the world, in Canaan and Phoenicia, in that area, in Greece, Turkey, summer has no rain normally. It's the dry season. From about the middle of April, beginning of May, until mid-October, there is typically no rain in the summer. And that's just the weather pattern. Then mid-October through April, it rains a lot. Jerusalem gets as much rain every year as London does, but it's all concentrated in the winter. But now, why does it always dry every summer? And they put together the story about Baal. Well, Baal, he dies every spring, and so he can't send the rain. And so he's dead all summer, but guess what happens in October? He comes back to life again and sends us the rain. So that's the story of Baal. That's how they explained it. He'd die and come back to life every single year, and his death and life are tied to the weather pattern. And so a lot of people just accepted that. We already saw that. But he'd die every summer and come back to life and send the rain. So in that context, there's a picture of him, by the way. That's also in the Louvre. And can you see, let's get a little closer. He always has an arm up, and look over at this arm. Can you see what he's holding in this arm? It looks like a tree branch, kind of. It's actually a bolt of lightning that's made to look kind of like a tree branch, because the lightning and the rain, they cause plants to grow. But he's also the one who throws down the lightning. That's him with a lightning bolt ready to throw it down in a minute to the earth. So when it's thundering, when it's lightning, look, Baal threw another one down. There's lightning. That's how they understood the whole thing. So knowing that about Baal now, thunder, lightning, rain, we go to the Bible, and Elijah, the first thing he says in the Bible in 1 Kings 17, he says, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, there will be no rain unless I say so," as his prophet. Notice the word lives. Is that sort of taking a jab at Baal? There won't be any rain as the God of Israel lives. See, the point here is that the God of Israel, the God, the invisible God, he isn't subject to death. And if it doesn't rain, it's because he wants it that way, not because he's dead and powerless for a while, like Baal. Even just the introduction's taking a shot at Baal. And so right there, how do we read Elijah's introduction? It's not just, "As the Lord God of Israel lives." That's not just some generic way of describing him. That's actually appears to be taking a direct hit at Baal, that God does not die like your false God does. Then they go to Mount Carmel and let's build an altar. Which one can light his own altar? Which one will send lightning or fire from heaven? If we know the story, Baal prophets can't get anything to happen. They pray and they dance and they chant and nothing happens. Elijah drenches everything in water and the Lord lights his own altar. He sends the lightning down, not Baal. And so people saw it. They understood the real God. Of all the ways to do it, why did they do it that way? Why did they have the God light as an altar? Because that's Baal's power. That contest was customized for that that false god Baal. And if we know Baal, that makes perfect sense. It's a perfect thing to do. And it's archaeology that taught us about Baal. So now instead of reading the story thousands of years later, he's just some idol, now we understand it the way the Israelites did. If we want to be originalists with the Bible, archaeology helps us understand it originally, as it was originally understood. And that's a great benefit. It helps us better understand things we read in the Bible. And that's a very valuable benefit. Aren't we trying to restore and be originalists with the Word of God and the Church of God? But how do we be originalists when there's thousands of years separating us from the people and places and events of the Bible? Archaeology helps us bridge that gap and be better restorationists, be better originalists. Just about done here. Let's go to the city of Caesarea. It's mentioned in the New Testament a few times, never mentioned in the Old Testament. You know why? Whose name do you see in the title? Caesar. Right. Caesars existed in the New Testament. And the city itself was new in the New Testament period. Herod the Great wanted a brand new city, and so he built one right there. There wasn't really a significant city there before. He built it from scratch. He wanted a brand new harbor there that could connect with Rome. Because the coast of Canaan, if you can see on the map, it's pretty flat and straight. There's not really a natural place for ships to go in, and dock and be protected from the wind, and the waves, like a breakwater. There's no natural harbor, really. And so Herod the Great, we need to make a harbor and strengthen our connection to Rome because, we want to be friends with Rome. So Herod discovered there's this brand new Roman invention called waterproof concrete. He's like, I'm going to go high tech. So they went to a section of coastline, which was straight, and they made these massive blocks, almost the size of this auditorium, of waterproof concrete. And they sank them just in a row going across, and then they built on top. And so what they did with waterproof concrete, they built an artificial port that was so big, it became one of the biggest ones in the Mediterranean, and the city itself became the Roman capital. It wasn't Jerusalem. The Roman capital was Caesarea. And here's a drawing of what it looked like. If you look, the coastline is just right here, and it's not that, there's no natural harbor, but look there, you see all that coming out? All that is artificial, and see that barrier, those walls, they break the waves. Ships can sail in there, and if there's a storm or the waters are rough, the ships won't just get banged around. You have a safe harbor created by technology of waterproof concrete. That's pretty impressive that Herod was able to do that with no engines either. It's quite a thing. And Paul sailed in and out of that harbor multiple times. We read about it in the New Testament. Today, the whole thing is underwater because there are earthquakes in the region. And frankly, what's the bottom of the ocean? What is that? Sand, silt. It's not rock. And does anyone recall a little song we sing about that in our Bible classes based on something Jesus said about building on the sand, building on the rock? And we can see the whole outline from the air. There was the entrance and those shadowy areas. That's where the waterproof concrete sat before, over time, over hundreds of years, it collapsed into the ocean finally. But it reminds us of this passage in Matthew 7. Those who hear the words of the Lord and do them, it's like building on rock, and nothing will shake it. You build on sand, it's just a matter of time before it eventually collapses. Those who hear the word of God and don't do it. And what Caesarea is a wonderful parable illustrating that point. Here's Caesarea, and you can see, even today, just a glimpse of the forces that eventually brought down that harbor over hundreds of years. And it fell, and great was its fall, anything on the sand, and archaeology can illustrate things in the Bible for us. We'll finish up with this. Two more things. This is a gate from ancient Babylon that was brought over from Babylon. They dug it up and brought it to Germany and reassembled it in Berlin. It somehow survived 2 world wars intact. And that's the gate that Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked under going in and out of Babylon all the time. We had the actual gate. We brought it. Isn't that amazing? We brought the whole gate over. And that lion used to be in the throne room of Babylon, in Nebuchadnezzar's throne room. So imagine you're in there with Nebuchadnezzar and you look on the walls and you have that. It's a little scary. Look at the face. That's a little scary looking. But isn't that the point? You're in the presence of the great king. It's good that you're a little bit scared, and the decor reflects that. Did Daniel look at that exact face? Probably, because he was in the throne room, no doubt, a number of times. And we can see an old city gate from a site where I used to excavate. That's a gate, and people used to walk in and out, and this city was built in David's time. Did David walk through that gate? Probably. And we can walk in that exact location now. And we can dig up little jars that used to hold like perfume or olive oil. And we found it almost entirely intact. That's when it came out of the ground. There's another jar there. And there's a woman who has a grinding stone. She worships with us. She's a nurse down in Florida. And that's what women would use to make flour to bake bread. You'd take that, and it fit her hand perfectly as a woman. And you take it and rub it and grind things up. There's a destruction, someone's kitchen that got burned in the time of the judges, and those jars were full of food. And we can sit there and look at the contents of their pantry. They had lentils, and they had olives, and they had grain like barley. And you can see some of it there burnt just over 3,000 years ago. Someone's kitchen. And we can sit there and dig it up. There's an oil lamp. You can see on the right, it was used. There's some scorching. It was used before the whole thing was destroyed and buried. There's some gold that Wayne Galloway in Stamford, Kentucky found when he went with me to dig one time. Jewelry. Pass a string through it. It's like a little pendant around your neck. The horns represent power, probably representing a god, a calf god of some kind. This building might have been David's palace in Jerusalem. And there's the shoreline of Capernaum where Jesus called James and John when they were cleaning their father's nets. Somewhere on this stretch, right there is where that happened. And archaeology helps us pinpoint it. This is a synagogue, and right below this was the floor level from the time of Jesus. And he spoke in that space and performed miracles in that space. And there's another view of it right there. And we can just keep that gold was probably from the temple of Jesus' time. And the Romans destroyed it, turned it into a coin to pay their soldiers as a thank you for participating in the war. And there's an old church building in Antioch, Pisidia, but you dig below it, and it was built on top of a synagogue from the time of Paul. Paul taught in the synagogue. Are they remembering the synagogue, Paul's visit, and that's why they put the church there? Archaeology fills us with wonder. Here's where Paul probably said in Caesarea, I appeal to Caesar. Probably in that very room right there. Archaeology is just wonderful. But finally, the last thing is that we have found a lot of people in the Bible through archaeology, confirmed they really existed. 53 people in the Old Testament who are named, we've confirmed them outside the Bible. Here's a list. People, different rulers, different countries. Here's page 2. That's just the Old Testament. We've also found 23 people named in the New Testament. We found them mentioned specifically in archaeology. And so, archaeology demonstrates the accuracy of the Bible. And I'll stop there. Thank you for your kind attention. Archaeology offers many benefits, and we'll appreciate these hopefully more and more as we go through the week. Thank you.